A single gunshot echoes across the Arizona desert, scattering ravens into a blood-red sky. Some debts can never be paid, some wounds never heal, and some ghosts refuse to stay buried. 8 years is a long time to run from your past, long enough to build walls around your heart, long enough to convince yourself that abandoning everything and everyone you loved was the right choice. But out here, where the wind carries whispers of ancient vendettas and the land holds secrets like a grave, time means nothing. The desert remembers. It knows the difference between justice and vengeance, between protection and cowardice. When a woman's most precious possession is stolen, old instincts awaken. Tracking skills once legendary resurface with terrifying precision. But following this trail leads to something far more dangerous than thieves or rustlers. It leads to a reckoning. Because the most skilled tracker in 3 territories is about to discover that all these years someone else has been hunting too, and blood always finds its way home. Morning light streaked across the Arizona desert, painting long shadows over the rugged terrain. Eleanor Ellie Blackwood sat motionless atop her chestnut mare at the edge of a sandstone ridge. At 45, the silver streaks in her raven-black hair caught the sunrise, framing a face weathered by harsh elements and harsher memories. Her copper eyes scanned the vast landscape, missing nothing. An eagle circled in the distance. A jackrabbit darted between scrub brush. The desert spoke to those who knew how to listen, and Ellie had been listening for a lifetime. She nudged her horse forward, descending toward Shadow Creek Ranch, a modest spread nestled against the base of the Dragoon Mountains. 100 acres of hardscrabble land and a weathered 2-room cabin represented 8 years of solitary work. To neighbors in nearby Copper Creek, she was simply the quiet widow who occasionally sold remarkably well-trained horses. None suspected there was more to her story. The ranch came into view, its fences straight, despite the unforgiving terrain. Near the corral stood a small stable where Silver Spirit would be waiting. The magnificent silver dun Mustang represented years of patient work, an animal once deemed untamable, now responding to commands that seemed barely perceptible. Ellie dismounted, her movements economical and practiced. Morning rounds, she murmured to herself, a habit born from years of solitude. She approached the stable, expecting Silver Spirit's familiar, welcoming nicker. Silence. The stillness hit her first. Usually Silver Spirit greeted her, his distinctive sound audible from yards away. Today silence hung heavy as the stable came into view. Ellie's stride faltered, instincts, long suppressed, suddenly roaring to life. The lock lay on the ground, cleanly cut with precision tools. Inside Silver Spirit's stall stood empty, abandoned. On the dirt floor, unfamiliar boot prints told a story as clear to Ellie as written words. Multiple men moving with purpose, leading a reluctant horse. She knelt, fingers hovering just above a depression in the soil. Her breathing slowed as she studied the marks, reading intention and direction where others would see random disturbances. 4 men, she whispered, one heavier with a distinctive limp. Expensive boots, not local ranch hands. Her fingers drifted to a small object half buried in the dust, a distinctive metal token embossed with a raven design. Recognition dawned cold and clear. Victor Raven. The name triggered memories she'd worked hard to bury. Raven led the notorious night riders responsible for rustling operations across 3 territories. 8 years ago, his gang had ambushed her and her husband, Robert, during a federal manhunt. The ambush that had left Robert dead. The ambush she'd blamed herself for leading them into. Ellie returned to her cabin with measured steps, her mind already calculating distances and likely routes. Inside, she moved directly to the loose floorboard beneath her bed, pulling it up to reveal a space untouched for nearly a decade. From this hidden compartment, she withdrew a wooden box inlaid with turquoise stones. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside lay the tools of her former trade, a custom Colt revolver with intricate engravings along the barrel, a brass spyglass, a leather-bound journal filled with tracking techniques, and a silver star. Not the simple type worn by local lawmen, but the distinctive badge of a federal marshal. Beneath these rested a folded wanted poster featuring a younger version of herself. Eleanor Desert Ghost Blackwood, United States Marshal Service. Before becoming the Widow Blackwood of Shadow Creek Ranch, she had been the legendary Desert Ghost, the tracker none could evade. She ran her fingers over the silver star, memories flooding back. She had chosen anonymity after the Ridgeline Pass incident, the failed pursuit that had cost Robert his life, and left her with a bullet scar across her right shoulder. The official report cited tactical error, but Ellie knew the truth. Her overconfidence had led them into an ambush. She couldn't forgive herself for that fatal miscalculation. A horse's approach interrupted her thoughts. She quickly returned the badge to its box but slipped the Colt into her waistband beneath her shirt. "Mrs. Blackwood, you home?" A young voice called from outside. Deputy Michael Young stood on her porch, hat in hand, his boyish face creased with concern. "Morning, Deputy," she acknowledged, gesturing for him to enter. "I was about to ride into town. Someone took Silver Spirit during the night." Young's eyes widened. "That's what brings me out here, Mrs. Blackwood. The Montgomery Ranch was hit too, 3 of their best quarter horses gone, and the Hendersons lost 2 from their north pasture." Ellie's expression remained steady, but her mind connected pieces. "They're gathering stock for a major sale then," she said, "probably heading for the Mexican border, where jurisdiction gets murky." "Sheriff Harmon's organizing a posse," Young said, though his tone suggested little confidence. "But with the dry ground and all those rocky ridges to the south?" He trailed off, the impossible nature of the tracking job hanging unspoken between them. Ellie nodded slowly, pouring coffee for the deputy while considering her response. What she didn't say was that she'd already identified the distinctive pattern in Night Rider's boot prints, recognized the rope marks that suggested Mexican vaquero training, and noted the deliberate attempt to brush away tracks leading south while leaving subtle false signs pointing east. "I'll ride in with you. Take a look at the other sites," she said. "Perhaps there's something to be learned." As Deputy Young sipped his coffee, unaware of the calculations happening behind Ellie's composed expression, she made her decision. She would give the appearance of cooperating with Sheriff Harmon's doomed posse attempt, but by nightfall she would be on the trail alone, equipped with tracking skills the rustlers couldn't possibly anticipate. The Copper Creek Town Hall buzzed with angry voices. Nearly every rancher in the valley had gathered, their faces tight with worry and outrage. 11 prize horses stolen in a single night represented not just financial loss, but a threat to livelihoods in the harsh border country. Sheriff James Harmon stood at the front of the room, his imposing frame commanding attention despite his 60 years. Beside him, Deputy Young cataloged the stolen horses' descriptions in a worn ledger. "Folks, settle down," Harmon called, raising weathered hands. "We've got a situation, but panic won't bring those horses back. I'm organizing a posse to ride out this afternoon." Ellie found a spot against the back wall, observing. Her arrival drew curious glances, a woman at a meeting typically reserved for the valley's men, but most were too preoccupied to pay her much attention. With all due respect, Sheriff Richard Montgomery spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of the valley's largest cattle operation. "Those thieves have at least a 12-hour head start, and there hasn't been rain in weeks to leave tracks. We'd be chasing shadows." "You got a better suggestion, Montgomery," Harmon countered, his face reddening slightly. "Telegraph the territorial marshals in Santa Fe," someone called. "Take 2 days minimum," Harmon replied. "By then those horses will be across the border or up into the mountain passes." Ellie remained silent, watching the pointless debate unfold. Her eyes drifted to the territory map hanging on the wall as she calculated routes, natural choke points, and water sources the rustlers would need to use when moving multiple horses. "Mrs. Blackwood," Deputy Young suddenly called, turning all eyes toward her. "You're the one who noticed the theft first. Anything unusual you might have seen? Anything that might help us?" The room fell silent as the men turned to stare at the widow, many clearly doubting a woman would have noticed anything of value. Ellie straightened slightly, weighing how much to reveal. "The fence was cut with wire cutters of Mexican design," she said quietly, her voice nonetheless carrying through the room. "Not common tools for ordinary thieves." Sheriff Harmon frowned. "And how would you recognize such a thing, Mrs. Blackwood?" Ellie met his gaze steadily. "My late husband traded with vaqueros from Sonora. I recognized the pattern." It wasn't a lie, merely an omission. Robert had indeed traded with Mexicans, though Ellie had spent far more time studying criminal techniques than he ever had. The thieves also left false trails. She continued, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. "Signs pointing east toward Diamondback Pass, but the horses were actually taken south toward the Dragoon Mountains. Summoning the room erupted in surprised murmurs. "How can you be so sure?" Montgomery demanded, skepticism heavy in his voice. Ellie opened her notebook, revealing a detailed sketch of horseshoe imprints. "Because one of the horses they're riding has a distinctive shoe custom work with unusual wear on the right front hoof. The impression is deeper on the south trail, hidden beneath brush they disturbed when passing." Huh. The men exchanged glances clearly, questioning how a widow who raised horses could make such precise observations. Dr. Claire Wilson, the town's physician, and one of the few who'd made an effort to befriend Ellie, stepped forward. "Perhaps you gentlemen aren't aware that Mrs. Blackwood routinely tracks down strayed livestock for half the valley. Just last month, she found the Carson boy when he wandered off into the Badlands. In that sandstorm, no less." Ellie shot Claire a grateful look. The doctor knew more about her past than most, having treated her shoulder wound during a painful flare-up 2 winters ago, but she'd kept Ellie's confidence. "With all due respect," Montgomery persisted, "finding a stray calf is a far cry from tracking organized horse thieves. My observations are yours to use or ignore, Mr. Montgomery." Ellie replied calmly, "I merely thought they might help." Sheriff Harmon studied her with narrowed eyes, something like recognition flickering across his face. "You know, you remind me of someone I heard about years back. The federal marshals had this woman tracker who could follow a man through 3 territories without losing the trail. Story was she could track a ghost over bare rock if she had to." Ellie kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. "Sounds like tall tales lawmen tell around campfires, Sheriff." "Maybe so," Harmon conceded, but his gaze remained thoughtful. "But I'd be a fool to ignore good information regardless of the source. Mrs. Blackwood, would you be willing to show us exactly where you think they headed?" As she moved to the front of the room, Ellie made quick, precise markings on the territory map that showed not just the direction she believed the rustlers had taken, but the likely route based on terrain, water access, and the limitations of moving multiple horses. "They'll avoid the main trails," she explained, her finger tracing a faint line. "But they can't take 11 horses through dense canyon country either. They'll follow game trails here, here, and here." She marked 3 spots. "They'll need water by midday in this heat, which means Sidewinder Creek is their first likely stop." The men crowded closer, their initial skepticism giving way to grudging interest. "That's good tracking, Mrs. Blackwood," Deputy Young said with genuine admiration. "It's just observation," Ellie replied softly, though her eyes revealed a depth of knowledge that went far beyond casual observation. As the meeting concluded and the posse preparations began, Claire pulled Ellie aside into the relative privacy of the town hall's small kitchen. "You're going after them yourself, aren't you?" the doctor asked bluntly. Ellie's slight smile was answer enough. "Ellie, these aren't just opportunistic thieves. Organized horse rustling is dangerous business. These men won't hesitate to kill anyone who follows them." "I'm well aware of the risks," Ellie replied, checking that no one could overhear them. "But Silver Spirit represents more than property to me. Without him, I lose everything I've built." Claire studied her friend's face. "This isn't just about the horse, though, is it? I've seen that look before. When you found the Carson boy, when you're on a trail, you become different, like you're finally allowing yourself to be who you really are." Ellie was silent for a long moment. 8 years is a long time to keep part of yourself buried," she finally admitted. "But I had my reasons." "Ridgeline Pass," Claire said quietly. Ellie's eyes flashed with surprise. "Army doctors talk to each other," Claire explained. "I had a colleague at Fort Bowie who mentioned an incident, a tracking mission that went wrong. He treated a female marshal with a shoulder wound who vanished afterward. He didn't give me a name, but I've treated that scar, Ellie. I know what a bullet wound looks like." Ellie's posture tensed, then gradually relaxed. After years of guarding her secrets, there was something almost liberating about being truly seen. "Robert died because of my overconfidence," she said softly. "I was so certain of my abilities, so sure I could outtrack anyone, that I led us straight into an ambush. I swore I'd never put anyone else at risk again." She glanced toward the main room where the posse was gathering. "That's why I need to do this alone." Claire gripped her arm firmly. "At least let me help you prepare. I know you've been having trouble with that shoulder in cold weather, and there's a storm moving in from the south." Ellie hesitated, then nodded. I'll stop by your office before I leave. But Claire not a word to anyone. As they rejoined the main group, Ellie watched the men preparing for their feudal posse, ride checking guns, gathering supplies, arguing over routes. They would take the obvious trails, make plenty of noise, and return empty-handed in a day or two. Meanwhile, she would be following signs invisible to most broken spiderwebs, indicating recent passage, the subtle compression of soil beneath pebbles, the slight discoloration of crushed lichen on rocks. All the minute details that would lead her straight to the rustlers, who had no idea they were about to be hunted by someone who could read the very language of the wilderness itself. Trinanurmi. Twilight cast purple shadows across Shadow Creek Ranch as Ellie made final preparations. She had stopped by Claire's office as promised, receiving medicine for her old shoulder wound and fresh bandages. But she declined the doctor's offer to accompany her to the ranch. Some journeys needed to be walked alone. Her saddlebags contained only essentials, water jerky, coffee ammunition for the colt, and her tracking tools. She dressed in dark clothing that would blend with the desert night, her gray-streaked hair tied back in a tight braid. The silver marshal's badge remained in its box beneath the floor, but she wore the colt openly now. Ellie was securing the last of her provisions when a sound froze her in place, the unmistakable click of a revolver hammer being cocked. "Don't move!" a woman's voice ordered from the shadows behind her. Ellie's hand hovered near her holster. "I'm armed, and I won't hesitate." "Neither will I," the voice replied. "My shot will hit you before you clear leather." The voice was young but steady, professional, not a common rustler. "What do you want?" Ellie asked, calculating angles and distances to potential cover. "Information first." The shadowed figure stepped forward, gun trained on Ellie's chest. "Are you going after Victor Raven and the Night Riders?" The question caught Ellie off guard. Who's asking? Someone with better reason to hunt Raven than a stolen horse? The figure stepped fully into the lantern light. A young woman, perhaps early 20s, with dark hair, cut short and practical. She wore trail-worn clothes and carried her revolver with the ease of long practice. But it was her eyes that made Ellie's breath catch copper-colored, exactly like her own. "My name is Sarah Blackwood," the young woman said, her gun unwavering. "And from what I've pieced together, you're my mother, the woman I've believed dead for 8 years. The world seemed to tilt beneath Ellie's feet. Her throat constricted as she stared at the young woman before her. Sarah's expression hardened. "Imagine my surprise when I tracked Raven to this territory, only to discover rumors of a widow with unusual tracking skills. A widow whose description matched the mother I watched die at Ridgeline Pass." "Sarah," Ellie whispered, the name unfamiliar on her tongue after so long. "I can explain." "Save it," Sarah cut her off. "I didn't come for explanations. I came for Raven, and you're going to help me find him." Ellie studied her daughter's face, the face of a child she'd abandoned to protect, now returned as a hardened woman with vengeance in her eyes. "Lower your gun," Ellie said quietly. "That's not how we're going to start this conversation." "And how exactly are we starting it?" Sarah's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through her controlled facade. 8 years of thinking you were dead. 8 years of nightmares about watching you fall at Ridgeline. 8 years of being passed from relative to relative while trying to piece together who the hell Victor Raven was and why he destroyed our family. Ellie took a careful step forward. "I made a terrible mistake, Sarah. One I've been paying for every day since. But pointing that gun at me won't undo it." For a long moment, neither woman moved. Then slowly, Sarah lowered her weapon. "Talk fast," she said, "because Raven's getting further away by the minute." Ellie gestured to the cabin's small table. "Sit, please." Sarah reluctantly took a seat, keeping her revolver on the table within easy reach. Ellie remained standing, suddenly uncertain how to condense 8 years of guilt and grief into words her daughter might understand. "After Ridgeline Pass," she began, "after your father was killed and I was shot, I woke up in an army hospital. The doctors told me I'd nearly died, but all I could think about was how my pride, my absolute certainty in my tracking abilities, had led us directly into Raven's trap." She unconsciously touched her shoulder where the bullet had torn through muscle and bone. "Robert was dead because of me, and I knew as long as I remained Marshal Blackwood, you would be in danger too. Raven had targeted us specifically because of me, because I'd built a reputation as someone who always got her man." Sarah's jaw tightened. So you let me think you were dead. I made arrangements through the marshal's service. Ellie continued, the words painful to speak aloud after so long. Made sure you'd be taken care of, that you'd be safe with your father's sister. Then I disappeared. Became Eleanor Blackwood widow. Someone who couldn't bring danger to your door. Someone Raven wouldn't bother hunting. You abandoned me. The accusation hung in the air between them. I protected you the only way I knew how. Ellie responded, though the justification sounded hollow, even to her ears. I was certain Raven would have killed you to get to me. He'd already murdered your father. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too. And yet you lost me anyway, Sarah said bitterly, just by choice rather than by force. The truth of those words hit Ellie like a physical blow. She had sacrificed her relationship with her daughter on the altar of protection and still managed to fail her completely. How did you find me? Ellie asked. I became what you were, Sarah answered, a hint of challenge in her voice. A tracker, a hunter. I've spent the last 3 years taking bounty jobs, building skills, all while following Raven's trail. When rumors reached Yuma about a rustling operation in Copper Creek territory, I recognized the pattern. His pattern? Sarah leaned forward. I came looking for Raven. Finding you alive was unexpected. And now we hunt him together, Sarah stated flatly. He stole your horse. He killed my father. He owes us both. Ellie shook her head. It's too dangerous. You're not ready to don't. Sarah's eyes flashed dangerously. Don't you dare tell me what I'm ready for. You sacrificed your right to maternal concern 8 years ago. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you how this is going to be. Mother and daughter stared at each other across the small table, two trackers sizing each other up. In her daughter's determined expression, Ellie saw echoes of herself at that age, the same confidence, the same steel, and potentially the same fatal pride. Raven is more dangerous than you realize, Ellie warned. He doesn't just steal horses. His operation extends into weapons-running protection rackets across the border territories. He has men everywhere, including law enforcement. All the more reason I need you, Sarah said. You know him. You've tracked him before. And failed, Ellie reminded her. That failure cost your father his life. Then this is your chance to make it right, Sarah countered. For both of us. Outside, a coyote called in the distance, the sound echoing off the Dragoon Mountains. The night was deepening, precious hours slipping away as the night riders put more distance between themselves and Shadow Creek Ranch. Ellie made her decision. We leave in 20 minutes. Pack light. Where we're going, speed matters more than comfort. Sarah nodded, a fragile truce established. As she rose to gather her gear from where she'd hidden it outside, she paused at the door. Just so we're clear, she said her back to Ellie. I haven't forgiven you. I don't know if I ever will. But right now, Raven matters more than old wounds. After she left, Ellie sat heavily in the chair her daughter had vacated, the weight of the past suddenly crushing. She had prepared herself for many dangers on this hunt, but not for the prospect of facing her greatest failure in the form of the daughter she'd abandoned. She strapped on her gun belt with hands that weren't quite steady. Whatever reckoning lay ahead with Raven, with Sarah, with herself, there would be no more running from it. Moonlight gleamed on rock and scrub brush as Eleanor and Sarah Blackwood rode south toward the Dragoon Mountains. They traveled in silence, two shadows moving through the desert night. The only sounds were the soft creak of saddle leather and the occasional call of nightbirds. Ellie led the way, reading the terrain with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a lifetime in wild places. Sarah followed several lengths behind her, posture rigid with unresolved tension. Near midnight, they reached Sidewinder Creek, a thin ribbon of water cutting through the harsh landscape. Ellie dismounted, dropping to one knee beside faint marks in the sand. They watered here, she said her first words in over an hour. 10, maybe 12 hours ago. Sarah joined her, studying the ground. How can you tell? I don't see any clear prints. Look at the grass. Ellie pointed to bent reeds along the creek bank. The way it's been disturbed and how much it's recovered tells us when. And here, she indicated a small area of mud. That's where they filled canteens. Sarah frowned, eyes narrowing as she analyzed the subtle signs. Okay, what else? 11 horses with riders makes a distinctive pattern. See this compression in the soil? That's where they moved the stolen animals through in single file. And here, Ellie fingered a tiny fragment caught in a thorny bush. Thread from a Mexican saddle blanket. Confirms it's the Night Riders. You make it sound so obvious, Sarah muttered. It becomes obvious once you know what to look for, Ellie replied. Your father had the same gift. He could read sign that most people walked right past. The mention of Robert brought immediate tension. Sarah straightened, turning away. Which direction did they head from here? She asked, deliberately changing the subject. Ellie pointed southeast toward a dark line of cliffs barely visible in the moonlight. They're making for Devil's Canyon. It's a natural choke point but provides good defensive positions and reliable water. She studied the sky, noting clouds building on the western horizon. We've got maybe 4 hours before dawn. We should rest the horses and move again at first light. Sarah shook her head. We keep going. Every hour gives them more distance. The horses need rest, Ellie countered, and tracking in darkness risks missing signs. We'd waste more time if we lose the trail. Fine, Sarah conceded reluctantly. 4 hours, no more. They made a cold camp away from the creek, avoiding fire that might signal their presence. As Sarah laid out her bedroll, Ellie noticed how efficiently she moved every action, practiced deliberate, not the movements of a novice. Where did you learn to track? Ellie asked quietly. Sarah paused, then resumed her preparations. Started with Joe Whitehorse at Fort Benson. He was Apache, worked as a scout for the Army. After that, I rode with Marcus Green out of El Paso. Bounty hunting taught me the rest. Green's a solid tracker, Ellie acknowledged. Hard but fair. He said the same about you once he realized who I was, Sarah replied. Said you were the best he'd ever seen, like she could smell which way the wind blew 3 days ago. Something like pride stirred in Ellie's chest, quickly replaced by sadness. Her daughter had sought out trackers to learn the very skills Ellie should have taught her. Try to get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow will be long. Sarah settled onto her bedroll, her back to Ellie. I've been chasing Raven for 3 years, she said, her voice carrying in the still night air. He never stays in one place long, always moving, always one step ahead. This is the closest I've ever been. What will you do when you find him? Ellie asked. The question hung between them for a long moment. What needed doing 8 years ago? Sarah finally answered. Justice. Justice and vengeance aren't the same thing, Ellie said carefully. Sarah turned her head slightly. That's rich coming from you. Aren't you on this trail for vengeance too? I'm here to recover what's mine, Ellie replied. Silver Spirit. And I'm here to settle what's mine, Sarah said. A debt written in my father's blood. Ellie wanted to argue further, to warn her daughter of the hollow victory vengeance offered, but held her tongue. Sarah had years of abandonment feeding her anger. Words wouldn't solve that tonight. Instead, she took first watch, sitting with her back against a boulder, listening to the night sounds of the desert, and watching over the sleeping form of the daughter she had failed. Dawn broke, with ominous clouds building to the west. Ellie and Sarah broke camp quickly, neither having slept much despite their exhaustion. They mounted up, continuing toward Devil's Canyon, as the first golden light touched the highest peaks of the Dragoon Range. The trail grew more distinct as they entered rockier terrain. Recent rainfall had left the ground receptive to impressions, and the night riders had made little effort to conceal their passage. They're confident, Sarah observed, pointing to obvious hoofprints. Not even trying to hide their trail anymore. Overconfidence, Ellie agreed. They think the law would never track them this far this fast. They didn't count on us, Sarah said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Near midday, they reached the approach to Devil's Canyon, a narrow passage between towering rock walls that opened into a series of box canyons beyond. Ellie reined in her horse, studying the terrain ahead with a frown. This is wrong, she said. Sarah pulled up beside her. What do you mean? The sign's too clear, too easy to follow. Ellie pointed to distinct tracks in the sandy soil. Raven's smarter than this. He knows the value of false trails. She dismounted, examining the ground more carefully. These tracks, they're multiple passes of the same 3 or 4 horses, made to look like a larger group. She looked up at the canyon walls, eyes narrowing. It's a setup. An ambush, Sarah concluded, scanning the high ground, where a rifleman could easily hide. Exactly what got your father killed, Ellie said grimly. Raven uses terrain to his advantage. At Ridgeline, he lured us into a narrow pass, then had men positioned above with rifles. She remounted, turning her horse away from the canyon entrance. We go around. There's another approach from the north. Longer, but it won't be watched. That'll add hours, Sarah protested. Better slow than dead, Ellie replied flatly. Trust me on this, Sarah. I've paid for this knowledge already. Reluctantly, Sarah followed as Ellie led them on a wide arc, avoiding the canyon entrance entirely. They traveled through increasingly difficult terrain, dismounting to lead the horses through dense scrub and over rocky shelves that offered no clear trail. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had swallowed the sun, bringing early dust to the landscape. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, a rare and violent occurrence in the desert. We need to find shelter before this hits, Ellie called over her shoulder, eyeing the approaching storm with concern. No, Sarah shouted back. We keep moving. Rain will slow Raven down too. It'll wash away his trail completely, Ellie countered, and flash floods in these canyons will kill us faster than any bullet. She pointed to a rock overhang half a mile ahead. There, we'll wait out the worst of it. They just reached the shelter when the sky opened. Rain hammered down in sheets, transforming the dusty ground into slick mud within minutes. They secured the horses in the deepest part of the overhang and huddled against the rock wall, watching sheets of water cascade off the edge of their temporary roof. How long will this last? Sarah asked, frustration evident in her voice. Desert storms like this could be 20 minutes or 2 hours. Ellie reached into her saddlebag, pulling out jerky and a canteen. Might as well eat while we wait. Sarah accepted the food without comment, chewing mechanically as she stared at the downpour. You really think Raven would have ambushed us if we'd gone through the canyon? She asked after a while. Ellie nodded. I've tracked men like him my whole life. They think the same way each time. Find defensible ground, set a trap, wait for pursuit to walk into it. How many men? Sarah pressed. In his current group, based on the tracks at the creek, I'd say 6, not counting Raven himself. His second in command is usually Diego Cortez, Mexican expert with rope and knife. There's a man they call Rattler Travis Reed, short temper, faster draw. Sarah listened intently, mentally filing away the information. Weaknesses. Raven's got a bum knee from an old injury, slows him down on rough ground. He compensates by always choosing good defensive positions. Ellie took a drink from her canteen. Cortez is superstitious, won't cross running water after dark. Rattler's impulsive, can be goaded into making mistakes. You know a lot about men you failed to catch 8 years ago? Sarah observed, her tone deliberately provocative. Ellie met her daughter's challenging gaze. I learned everything I could about them after Ridgeline. Every habit, every pattern. Too late to save your father, but I promised myself if they ever surfaced again, I'd be ready. Yet you hid on your ranch for 8 years. I did what I thought was right, Ellie replied, her voice tight. For both of us. For you, maybe. Sarah set aside her half-eaten jerky. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up believing your mother died a hero, only to learn years later she might be alive, to wonder why she never came back for you? The accusation hung between them, punctuated by thunder that rolled across the canyonlands. I thought about you every day, Ellie said quietly. Every single day. Not enough to find me, apparently. Sarah turned away, staring out at the rain. Aunt Catherine did her best, but she was old, set in her ways. Never understood why I couldn't just be a proper young lady. By 16, I was riding scout for wagon trains, using what little I remembered of your tracking lessons. She looked back at Ellie, her eyes hard. I figured if I became good enough someday, I'd find Raven, make him pay for what he took from us. It was the only thing that kept me going some days. Ellie felt the weight of her choices pressing down heavier than the storm clouds above. I'm sorry, Sarah. More than you can ever know. Shiri. Sorry doesn't change anything, Sarah replied. Finding Raven, that's what matters now. The rain continued its assault, but gradually began to slacken. Light returned to the landscape as the storm moved eastward, leaving behind a transformed desert, muddy, glistening, alive with water that wouldn't last. Ellie rose, stretching her stiff shoulder. We should move. The storm will have Raven's men seeking shelter too. Might be our best chance to approach undetected. Erum. They saddled up, leading their horses carefully over the slick ground until they found firmer footing. The storm had obliterated most obvious tracks, but Ellie spotted subtle signs of freshly broken tree branch where a horse had pushed through displaced rocks in a dry stream bed, now flowing with runoff. They went this way, she determined, pointing toward a ridge that formed the northern boundary of Devil's Canyon. Probably have a main camp in one of the box canyons beyond. As they climbed the ridge using a game trail too narrow for most riders to notice, Sarah suddenly raised her hand in warning. She pointed silently to a thin curl of smoke rising from the canyon below, nearly invisible against the stormy sky. They dismounted, securing their horses to scrub brush, and crawled the last few yards to the ridge's edge. Below them stretched a small box canyon with steep walls on three sides. A natural spring bubbled from rock at the far end, creating a pool before disappearing underground again. Near this water source, several men had established camp. Ellie counted 4 figures moving around a carefully shielded fire, and there, picketed near the spring, stood 11 horses, including a distinctive silver dun. Silver Spirit! Ellie breathed relief flooding through her. And Raven! Sarah whispered, scanning the camp. Ellie studied the men below, frowning. I don't see him, or Cortez. They must be scouting or setting watches. She pulled her spyglass from her saddlebag, using it to examine the camp more carefully. That's Travis Reed by the fire. The others are hired guns, not Raven's usual crew. So where's Raven? Sarah asked. Good question. Ellie continued her survey, checking the canyon walls for lookouts. I count only 4 men in camp. Raven and Cortez make 6. There should be at least one more based on the tracks we've been following. Sarah tensed beside her. You think the 7th might be? The metallic click of a revolver hammer behind them finished her thought. Looking for someone, a deep voice drawled. Ellie and Sarah froze, neither daring to reach for their weapons. Slowly they turned to find a tall man in a duster standing behind them, rifle trained at their backs. His weathered face split in a cruel smile beneath a thick mustache. Well, well, he said. Diego was right. We did have shadows. He gestured with his rifle. On your feet. Nice and slow. As they stood, Ellie positioned herself slightly in front of Sarah, a protective instinct she couldn't suppress. Hands where I can see 'em, the man ordered. Then start walking. Down the trail there toward camp. He kept a safe distance, never presenting an easy target. You Raven's new hired help? Ellie asked, buying time as they moved. The man snorted. Hired help, lady, I'm Travis Reed. Raven's right hand for 5 years now. He studied her face more carefully. Do I know you? Just a concerned horse owner, Ellie replied neutrally. Right. Reed's tone suggested he didn't believe her. Boss is going to be real interested in how 2 women tracked us all the way from Copper Creek, especially when one of them looks mighty familiar. They descended into the canyon, Reed keeping them ahead of him at all times. As they approached the camp, the other men noticed, reaching for weapons, until Reed called out. Look what I found up on the ridge. Boys, couple of nosy ladies out for a stroll. The men laughed, abandoning their tasks to circle the newcomers. Ellie noted their positions, equipment, and the distance to Silver Spirit. Her mind cataloged escape routes, potential weapons, defensible positions, all while maintaining an outward appearance of defeat. Where's Raven? She asked, scanning the camp. Reed prodded her forward with his rifle. Eager to meet the boss, are you? He'll be back soon enough. Now sit down over there by that rock, both of you. Ellie and Sarah complied, sitting side by side on a large flat boulder near the fire. The outlaws kept their distance weapons trained on the women. Check them for guns, Reed ordered one of the men. A lanky outlaw approached, grinning as he patted Ellie down, roughly taking her Colt and a small knife from her boot. He moved to Sarah next, his hands lingering longer than necessary until she stiffened. Watch yourself, Sarah warned, her voice deadly quiet. The man laughed. Or what, little lady? Or I'll make sure you never touch another woman again, she replied evenly. Something in her tone made him hesitate, then step back after taking her revolver. This one's got Spirit Travis. Maybe we should... Shut up, Carter. Reed cut him off. Raven doesn't allow that kind of business. You know the rules. Mum. Carter retreated, sullen but obedient. Reed studied their prisoners with narrowed eyes. Now we wait, he announced. Boss will want to handle this personally. Ellie leaned closer to Sarah, whispering under her breath. 4 armed men plus Reed. 2 exits the main canyon mouth and a narrow pass behind those rocks. Silver Spirit is 60 yards to our left. I count 6 guns 30 yards to cover before we reach any shelter. Sarah murmured back. Not good odds. "Ugh, we're not making a move yet," Ellie replied softly. "I need to see Raven first." Sarah gave her a sharp look. "This isn't about Silver Spirit anymore, is it?" Before Ellie could answer, hoofbeats echoed from the canyon entrance. Two riders appeared moving at an unhurried pace. Ellie's heart thundered in her chest as she recognized the lead figure, tall and lean, with a black duster and wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Even at a distance, she knew him immediately. Victor Raven. The men dismounted, speaking quietly with Reed, who gesticulated toward the prisoners. Raven's companion, Diego Cortez. Ellie presumed laughed at something Reed said. Then Raven turned, looking directly at the captured women. He approached slowly, limping slightly, the old knee injury Ellie remembered. As he drew closer, his features became clear, a hawkish nose, cold blue eyes, and a scar that pulled at the corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent half-smile. He stopped several paces away, studying them with clinical detachment. Recognition dawned in his eyes as they settled on Ellie. "Well," he said, his voice a soft southern drawl that belied his dangerous reputation. "If it isn't the ghost herself, Marshal Eleanor Blackwood. Though I heard you died at Ridgeline Pass." "Reports of my death were premature," Ellie replied evenly. Raven's gaze shifted to Sarah, then back to Ellie, noting the similarities between them. "And you brought company. Family resemblance is quite striking." His scarred mouth twisted in a smile. "The daughter, I presume? My how she's grown." Sarah lunged forward, only to be yanked back by Ellie's restraining hand. "Don't give him the satisfaction," Ellie cautioned. Raven chuckled. "She's got your fire, Marshal, and her father's foolish bravery." "You stole my horse," Ellie said, deliberately changing the subject. "I've come to take him back." "Your horse?" Raven raised an eyebrow. "That magnificent silver dun is yours. My compliments on your taste. He's worth every bit of trouble." "Let's cut the pleasantries," Ellie said coldly. "You know who I am. You know why I'm here." "Actually, that's not entirely clear," Raven replied, pulling up a camp stool to sit across from them. His bad knee seemed to trouble him. "You see, the Marshal Blackwood, I remember, wouldn't come after stolen livestock, no matter how valuable. She hunted men, not horses. No." He studied her with unnerving intensity. "So I find myself wondering why the legendary desert ghost, a woman who supposedly died 8 years ago, would suddenly resurface over a horse theft. Unless what?" Ellie prompted when he paused. "Unless this isn't about the horse at all." Raven's eyes gleamed with understanding. "This is about Ridgeline Pass, isn't it? Unfinished business?" The way he said it, casual, almost amused, sent ice through Ellie's veins. This was the man who had ordered Robert's death, who had nearly killed her, who had shattered her family and sent her into hiding for 8 years. "You murdered my husband," she said, each word precise and sharp. "You changed my life that day, changed my daughter's life." "Business," Raven replied with a shrug. "Nothing personal. Your husband was just in the way." Sarah strained against Ellie's grip again, fury radiating from her in palpable waves. "You're both in quite a predicament now," Raven continued, seemingly unconcerned by their anger. "Two women alone, miles from help. A posse would never find you out here. By tomorrow, those horses will be across the border, including your pretty silver dun." "The posse knows exactly where we are," Ellie bluffed. "Sheriff Harmon and 12 armed men. They're less than an hour behind us." Raven laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "Oh, Marshal, you've lost your touch. We've had men watching our back trail all day. There's no posse." He leaned closer. "It's just us out here, like old times." Ellie met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. "What are you going to do with us?" "Now that's the interesting question," Raven mused. "The practical thing would be to put bullets in both your heads and bury you where no one would ever look. That's what Diego would recommend." He nodded toward his Mexican lieutenant, who watched the exchange with cold detachment. "But I've always had a soft spot for worthy adversaries," Raven continued. "And you, Marshal, were the worthiest I ever faced. Did you know I still have nightmares about you tracking me? The desert ghost, they called you. Said you could smell which way the wind blew 3 days past." "Let my daughter go," Ellie said quietly. This is between you and me." "Mom, no," Sarah protested. Raven observed their exchange with interest. "Touching, but I'm afraid that's not possible. She's seen too much. We all have our crosses to bear, Marshall. Yours is knowing you led your daughter into danger." Again, he stood adjusting his gun belt. "Tie them up," he ordered Reed. "We move the horses at first light. I'll decide what to do with our guests before then." As Reed and Carter approached with rope, Ellie counted the paces to the nearest cover, calculating angles and timing. 5 armed men all watching them closely. The odds were terrible. "Don't try anything," she whispered to Sarah. "Not yet." Reed bound their wrists tightly, then secured them to a juniper tree at the edge of camp. The rough bark dug into Ellie's back as she tested the bonds, finding little give. Once satisfied with his knots, Reed returned to the fire, leaving the women alone. "This is why you didn't want me along," Sarah muttered, her voice low enough that only Ellie could hear. "You knew it would end like this." "It hasn't ended yet," Ellie replied. "Night's coming. Opportunities will present themselves." Sarah tugged at her bindings, grimacing. "I hope you have a plan, because all I see is a quick trip to an unmarked grave." "I always have a plan," Ellie said, though in truth, their options were severely limited. She shifted her position slightly, feeling the rough tree bark against her bound wrists. "See if you can reach the knot on my hands. I might be able to do the same for yours." Terefuri reached him. They worked in silence as dusk descended on the canyon. The outlaws busied themselves with camp chores, cooking dinner, over the fire, trading crude jokes. Cortez kept a watchful eye on the prisoners, his hand never far from his pistol. After several futile attempts to reach each other's bindings, Sarah hissed in frustration. "It's no use. The ropes are too tight." Ellie glanced toward the darkening sky, noting the position of the setting sun. "Night will be here soon. They'll post guards, but the others will sleep. We'll find our moment." "And if we don't?" Sarah asked, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. Ellie turned her head to meet her daughter's gaze. "Then I need you to know something. Whatever mistakes I made leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong." Sarah looked away, her profile sharp against the fading light. "My whole life I built you up in my head. The perfect mother, the legendary Marshall. Finding out you were alive but chose to stay away." She swallowed hard. "It broke something in me." "I know," Ellie said simply, "and I'm sorry, more than I can ever say." Their conversation was interrupted as Reed approached, carrying 2 tin plates of beans and hardtack. He set them on the ground nearby, then partially loosened one of Ellie's hands. "Boss says to feed you," he explained gruffly. "Can't have you dying before he decides what to do with you." "Very considerate," Ellie replied dryly. Reed smirked. "Don't get ideas. You're being watched. Try anything, and I put a bullet in the girl first." He nodded towards Sarah. "Understood." Ellie nodded, taking the plate with her freed hand. Reed repeated the process with Sarah, then retreated to the fire. They ate in silence, awkwardly, managing the food with one hand each. The meal was poor, but Ellie knew they needed strength for whatever lay ahead. As she ate, she continued to survey the camp, noting the positions of men and weapons, studying the routine that was establishing itself as night fell. Raven sat apart from his men, his back against a boulder, cleaning an ornate revolver by the light of a small lantern. Occasionally he glanced toward the prisoners, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. As predicted, once night fully descended, the outlaws arranged watches. Reed took first shift, positioning himself near the canyon entrance with a rifle across his knees. The others rolled into blankets around the dying fire, while Raven retired to a small tent pitched near the spring. "They're getting careless," Ellie whispered once the camp settled. "Only one man watching. We." "Still one too many," Sarah replied. "And we're still tied up." Ellie flexed her wrist where Reed had loosened the rope to allow her to eat. The binding was slightly weaker now, giving her a fraction more movement. "Keep working your ropes against the tree bark," she instructed. "Slowly. Don't attract attention." For the next hour they worked silently, rubbing their bindings against the rough juniper bark whenever Reed's attention was directed elsewhere. Ellie's wrists were raw and bleeding, but she felt the rope beginning to fray. Suddenly, a sound from the canyon entrance drew Reed's attention. He stood rifle ready, peering into the darkness. "Who goes there?" he called, his voice tense. Silence answered him. Reed hesitated, then moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, disappearing into the shadows. Now, Ellie hissed, redoubling her efforts against the rope. With a final painful twist, she felt her right hand come free. Quickly, she worked to untie her left. A gunshot cracked through the night, followed by a strangled cry. The camp erupted into chaos. The sleeping outlaws lurched awake, grabbing for weapons. Cortez emerged from his blankets with a knife already in hand. Raven appeared from his tent, revolver drawn. "Read!" Cortez called. When no answer came, he barked orders in Spanish and English. Carter Garcia checked the entrance. Martinez the horses. In the confusion, Ellie managed to free herself completely. She turned to Sarah's bindings, working frantically as the outlaws spread out weapons trained on the darkness. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered as Ellie loosened her ropes. "I don't know," Ellie admitted, "but it's our only chance." As Sarah's hands came free, Ellie scanned the ground near them, looking for anything that might serve as a weapon. More gunfire erupted from the canyon entrance, 3 rapid shots followed by return fire from the outlaws. Someone screamed in pain. "The posse," Sarah suggested, hope in her voice. "Maybe," Ellie replied, though something didn't feel right. The attack was too precise, too focused. Not the frontal assault a posse would mount. "This way," she urged, pulling Sarah toward the deepest shadows along the canyon wall. "Stay low." They crept along the perimeter of the camp, using the chaos as cover. The remaining outlaws had taken defensive positions, firing blindly into the darkness, where the attack seemed to originate. "We need weapons," Sarah said as they paused behind a large boulder. Ellie nodded, her eyes fixed on an outlaw who had fallen near the fire, his gun still in his holster. "Cover me!" Before Sarah could protest, Ellie darted forward in a crouching run. She reached the fallen man, confirmed he was dead with a quick touch to his neck, then extracted his revolver. She was turning back when a bullet kicked up dirt inches from her foot. "There!" Cortez shouted, leveling his pistol for another shot. Ellie dove for cover as Sarah scooped up a rock and hurled it at Cortez. The stone caught him in the shoulder, throwing off his aim. His shot went wide, giving Ellie time to scramble back behind the boulder. "Thanks," she gasped, passing the revolver to Sarah. "You're a better shot." Sarah checked the cylinder, 3 bullets remaining. "Not much to work with." "Make them count," Ellie replied. She peered around the edge of their shelter, trying to locate Raven in the chaos. "We need to get to the horses." The gunfire from the canyon entrance had stopped. An eerie silence fell over the camp, broken only by the moans of the wounded. "Cortez!" Raven's voice rang out. "Report." "2 men down at the entrance," Cortez called back from somewhere in the shadows. "Carter and Garcia. Martinez is hit but alive." "And our guests," Raven demanded. After a pause, "Gone. They've slipped their ropes." Raven cursed. "Find them. They can't have gone far." Ellie touched Sarah's arm, pointing toward the picketed horses. Silver Spirit stood alert, ears pricked toward the commotion. If they could reach him and the other mounts, they'd have a chance. "On my signal," Ellie whispered. "Stay behind me." As they prepared to move, a new voice called from the canyon entrance, unfamiliar with a hard edge of authority. "Victor Raven, this is United States Marshal Daniel Wright. You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up." Ellie froze, exchanging a startled look with Sarah. "A federal marshal." Here Raven's laugh echoed off the canyon walls. "I've heard better bluffs, Marshal. If you had enough men to surround us, you wouldn't be calling from the entrance." "Last chance, Raven," the voice replied. "Surrender now, or we come in shooting." "You come in shooting," Raven called back, "and the women die first." Silence followed this declaration. Ellie gripped Sarah's arm tightly, mind racing. Whoever this Marshal Wright was, his arrival had changed the equation completely. "Change of plans," she whispered. "Head for the narrow pass behind the spring. It's our best chance while they're distracted." They began inching backward, keeping low and using the scattered boulders for cover. They'd made it halfway to the pass when a shadow detached itself from the darkness ahead of them. "Going somewhere, ladies?" Cortez stood blocking their path, his gun trained on them. In his other hand, he held a wicked-looking knife. "The boss wants words with you." Sarah raised her revolver, but Cortez clicked his tongue. "Drop it, girl. Even if you shoot me, the others will hear. You won't make it 10 feet. Ellie stepped forward, deliberately placing herself between Cortez and Sarah. "Let us pass, Diego. This doesn't end well for anyone otherwise." "That's where you're wrong, Ghost," he replied, using Ellie's old nickname with contempt. "This ends exactly as the boss wants it to." He gestured with his gun. Now move. Back to camp. Slowly. They had no choice but to comply. Cortez herded them toward the center of camp where Raven stood directing his remaining men. Two outlaws lay dead near the entrance. Martinez sat propped against a rock, clutching a bloody shoulder. Raven turned as they approached, his expression shifting from concern to satisfaction. There you are. I was beginning to worry. Let us go, Raven, Ellie demanded. Your position's compromised. You've got a federal marshal outside and at least 2 men down. Cut your losses. And miss this reunion. Raven shook his head. I don't think so, Ghost. Not when things are finally getting interesting. From the canyon entrance, Marshal Wright called again. Your time's running out, Raven. We've got men positioned on the ridge. There's no escape. He's bluffing, Cortez insisted. He came alone or with 1, maybe 2 men. The shots we heard were just to create confusion. Perhaps, Raven conceded. But he's right about one thing. Time is running short. He studied the women with calculating eyes. I need insurance to get out of this canyon. You two will do nicely. We're not going anywhere with you, Sarah spat. Raven's scarred mouth twisted in a smile. Spirited like her mother. But you misunderstand, girl. I only need 1 hostage. He raised his revolver, aiming it deliberately at Ellie's chest. And between the 2 of you, the former marshal will ensure better cooperation from our friend outside. No, Sarah lurched forward, but Cortez caught her arm, twisting it painfully behind her back. Now, Marshal Blackwood, we're going to take a little walk to the canyon entrance, Raven continued. You'll explain to your colleague that if he wants you alive, he'll allow me and my men safe passage with the horses. And my daughter, Ellie asked, her voice steady despite the gun aimed at her heart. She stays here with Diego as additional insurance. Once I'm clear, I'll send word where to find her. Raven's expression left little doubt about the truthfulness of that promise. Ellie glanced at Sarah, still struggling in Cortez's grip. The moment stretched taut with tension and impossible choices. Then in a movement so swift it seemed impossible for a man of his size, Raven stepped forward and pressed his revolver against Ellie's temple. Enough discussion. Move. As they started toward the canyon entrance, the night exploded in gunfire, but not from the direction they expected. Shots rang out from above, from the ridge overlooking the canyon. Bullets kicked up dirt around them as Raven's men dove for cover. The ridge, Cortez shouted. They're on the ridge. In the chaos, Sarah wrenched free of Cortez's grip and drove her elbow into his stomach. He doubled over, and she twisted away, grabbing for the gun he dropped. Ellie seized her moment, slamming her fist into Raven's injured knee. He howled in pain, his grip loosening enough for her to break free. She dove for the nearest cover, a fallen log near the fire. More shots rained down from above, systematic and precise. Not the wild firing of a posse, but the disciplined attack of trained lawmen. Sarah, Ellie called, scanning the chaos for her daughter. Here, Sarah had taken shelter behind the same boulder where they'd hidden earlier. She held Cortez's revolver, covering Ellie's position. Raven had recovered, limping quickly toward the shelter of his tent. The horses, he shouted to his remaining men. Get to the horses! Martinez and the last uninjured outlaw made a dash for the picketed animals. More shots from the ridge dropped Martinez. The other man reached the horses and began frantically cutting them loose. Ellie saw her chance. Cover me, she called to Sarah, then sprinted toward Silver Spirit. Bullets cut the air around her as she ran, but none found their mark. She reached the silver dun just as the outlaw finished cutting the picket line. The other horses scattered, but Silver Spirit stood his ground, recognizing his mistress. Ellie grabbed his halter, speaking soothing words as she swung onto his bare back. With her knees, she guided him toward Sarah's position. Sarah, come on! Sarah broke cover, running toward the approaching horse. Ellie reached down, catching her daughter's outstretched hand and pulling her up behind her. More gunfire erupted as they rode for the canyon entrance. Ellie felt Sarah jerk behind her, heard her gasp of pain. Sarah, she called, alarmed. I'm hit, Sarah managed through gritted teeth. Keep going. Heart pounding, Ellie urged Silver Spirit forward. The magnificent horse responded, accelerating toward the narrow opening where Marshal Wright and his men presumably waited. Marshal, coming out! Ellie shouted as they approached. Don't shoot! They burst from the canyon into the open desert beyond. 3 men crouched behind boulders, rifles trained on the entrance. They lowered their weapons as Ellie reined Silver Spirit to a halt. Marshal Blackwood, a tall man with a weathered face and a federal badge pinned to his vest, stepped forward. "My daughter's been shot," Ellie said urgently, helping Sarah slide from the horse's back. Blood darkened her shirt where a bullet had grazed her side. "Miller, get the medical kit," Wright ordered one of his deputies. As they eased Sarah to the ground, Ellie turned back toward the canyon. "Raven's still in there, with at least 2 men." Wright nodded. "We've got the entrance covered, and 2 men on the ridge. He's not going anywhere." Ellie's focus was torn between the canyon and her wounded daughter. Sarah clutched her side, face pale in the moonlight, but her eyes were clear and alert. "It's just a graze," she insisted as Miller bandaged the wound. "I can ride." "Not yet," Ellie countered firmly. Hoofbeats sounded from within the canyon. Ellie and Wright both raised their weapons as a lone rider emerged at a gallop. "Raven!" Wright shouted. "Stop or we fire!" The rider didn't slow. Rifles cracked from the lawmen's position, but the horse and rider kept coming, veering sharply to the right once clear of the entrance. Ellie raised her borrowed revolver, tracking the fleeing figure. She had a clear shot center mass, an easy target at this range. Her finger tensed on the trigger. "Mom, don't," Sarah called from behind her. "We need him alive. For justice, not vengeance." Ellie's hand wavered. 8 years of pain, of hiding, of separation from her daughter, all because of the man now fleeing into the desert night. She adjusted her aim and fired. The rider jerked as the bullet found its mark, but didn't fall. The horse continued into the darkness, its hoofbeats fading. "You hit him," Wright asked, lowering his rifle. "Shoulder or arm?" Ellie replied, a curious mixture of regret and relief washing through her. "Non-lethal. My men will track him at first light," Wright assured her. "He won't get far wounded and alone." Ellie turned back to Sarah, kneeling beside her. "How bad is it?" "I'll live," Sarah said, wincing as Miller tightened the bandage. "Probably won't even scar, unlike some people I know." She eyed Ellie's shoulder where the old bullet wound lay hidden beneath her shirt. Despite everything, Ellie found herself smiling. "You always were tougher than you looked, even as a little girl." Sarah attempted to sit up, grimacing with the effort. "Did you mean to miss with Raven?" Ellie considered the question. "I meant to wound, not kill," she finally answered. "You were right. He deserves justice, not a quick end." Wright approached, holstering his revolver. "We need to clear the canyon and secure the remaining outlaws. Can your daughter travel?" "I'm fine," Sarah insisted before Ellie could answer. "We can't let Cortez escape while we're sitting here." "You've lost blood," Ellie pointed out. "And you've lost 8 years," Sarah countered. "I'm not losing Raven or Cortez now that we're this close." Ellie recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes, the same stubborn resolve she'd seen in the mirror countless times during her martial days. She helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her when she swayed slightly. "We'll secure the canyon," she told Wright. "But at first light, we're joining your hunt for Raven." Wright smiled slightly. "Wouldn't expect anything less from the Desert Ghost." Together, they moved back toward the canyon entrance, where the remaining outlaws had surrendered to the deputies on the ridge. Cortez was among them, his hands bound behind his back, his expression murderous as he spotted Ellie and Sarah. "This isn't over, Ghost," he spat as they passed. "You're right about that, Diego," Ellie replied calmly. "It's just beginning." With Sarah leaning against her, Ellie surveyed the captured outlaws, the recovered horses, and the open desert where Raven had disappeared. The night's events had changed everything. Her carefully constructed anonymity was shattered. Her past and present had collided with violent force. But for the first time in 8 years, she felt something like purpose, returning a clarity that had been missing since Ridgeline Pass. She looked at her daughter wounded, but unbowed, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The hunt for Victor Raven had only just begun. Dawn broke cold and clear over the desert. Eleanor Blackwood stood at the edge of the Night Riders' former camp, watching as Marshal Wright's deputies secured the last of the prisoners. Diego Cortez sat bound with the others, his dark eyes following Ellie's every move with undisguised hatred. Sarah approached, moving gingerly to favor her injured side. The bullet graze had been cleaned and properly bandaged during the night, but Ellie knew it must pain her. "Wright's men found blood on the rocks where Raven exited the canyon," Sarah reported. "Your shot definitely hit him. They're preparing to track him now." Ellie nodded, her eyes on the distant horizon, where the sun painted the Dragoon Mountains gold and crimson. "How are you feeling?" "Well enough to ride," Sarah replied firmly. "Don't even think about leaving me behind." A ghost of a smile touched Ellie's lips. "Wouldn't dream of it." Marshal Wright joined them, his weathered face lined with exhaustion after the night's events. "My deputies have secured the stolen horses. They'll escort the prisoners back to Copper Creek while we pursue Raven." "What brought you out here, Marshal?" Ellie asked the question that had nagged at her since his timely arrival. "This is a long way from federal jurisdiction." Wright adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Been tracking Raven's operation for months. When reports came in about horse thefts matching his pattern, I moved in." He studied Ellie's face. "Never expected to find the desert ghost out here, though. You disappeared thoroughly after Ridgeline Pass." "I had my reasons," Ellie replied. "I'm sure you did." Wright's tone suggested he understood more than he was saying. "The important thing is, we've got Cortez and most of the gang. Now we just need Raven himself to complete the set." "He's wounded and alone," Sarah pointed out. "Shouldn't be difficult to track." "Don't underestimate him," Ellie cautioned. "I've made that mistake before. Raven survived worse situations." Wright nodded agreement. "He's resourceful, and desperate men are dangerous." He turned, gesturing toward the horses his deputies had prepared. "Shall we?" As they mounted up, Ellie on Silver Spirit, now properly saddled, and Sarah on a sturdy bay from the marshal's string, Ellie felt a curious sensation. For 8 years she had avoided anything resembling her former life. Now riding out with a federal marshal on a manhunt, it felt eerily familiar, like slipping into a well-worn coat she'd almost forgotten she owned. Wright's best tracker, a half-Cherokee deputy named Tom Blackhawk, took the lead as they exited the canyon. He moved with fluid efficiency, reading sign that would be invisible to less experienced eyes. Ellie rode beside him, confirming his findings with her own observations. "Blood trail heads southeast," Blackhawk noted, pointing to dark spatters on pale stone. "He's making for the border. Probably has a bolt hole in Sonora." "How much blood?" Ellie asked. "Steady drip, not a pour. Your shot winged him good, but didn't hit anything vital." They followed the trail through growing heat, the sun climbing higher as morning progressed toward noon. Raven had made no attempt to hide his passage, perhaps too wounded to bother or simply confident in his knowledge of the terrain. As they rode, Sarah edged her mount closer to Ellie's. "How did you learn to track like this?" she asked, her voice pitched low enough that only Ellie could hear. "I know Grandpa taught you basics, but this—" She gestured to where Ellie had just pointed out a displaced stone that confirmed Raven's direction. "Your father actually—" Ellie replied, surprising herself with how easily the words came after years of avoiding any mention of Robert. "He was Army Scouts before he joined the Marshals. Taught me everything he knew. Said I had a natural eye for it. We'd practice together on weekends when you were little." Sarah fell silent, absorbing this connection to the father she barely remembered. "I have flashes sometimes," she admitted after a moment, "of him showing me animal tracks, teaching me to move quietly through the woods behind our house. He was so proud of how quickly you learned," Ellie said, her voice softening with memory. "Used to tell everyone his daughter would be a better tracker than both of us someday." The moment of connection hung between them, fragile but real, a small bridge spanning the chasm of 8 lost years. Their quiet exchange was interrupted as Blackhawk raised his hand, signaling a halt. He dismounted, examining the ground with intense focus. "Trail changes here," he announced. "He's riding harder, pushing his horse, and the blood's less frequent." He pointed southeast. "Making straight for Rattlesnake Ridge. If he crosses those mountains, he'll be in Mexico by nightfall." Wright frowned. "Can we catch him before the border?" "Maybe," Blackhawk replied. "If we ride hard and he stops to rest, that wound will slow him eventually." "Then we push on," Wright decided, looking to Ellie and Sarah for confirmation. Ellie nodded, but her attention had shifted to the surrounding terrain. Something felt wrong, a prickling sense of unease she'd learned never to ignore during her years as a marshal. "Hold," she said, scanning the rocky outcroppings ahead. "We're being watched." Wright tensed his hand, moving subtly toward his holster. "Raven's men." "Not likely," Ellie replied. "They're all captured or dead except Raven himself." "Apache," Blackhawk suggested. This was still their territory, though most had been forced onto reservations. "Maybe." Ellie stood in her stirrups, making herself deliberately visible as she called out, "Show yourself, we mean no harm." Silence answered her. Then from behind a jumble of boulders, 50 yards ahead, a figure emerged, an older man in worn ranch clothes, rifle cradled in his arms but not aimed directly at them. "That's far enough," he called, voice gravelly with age. "State your business." Wright moved his horse forward, hand touching the badge on his vest. "U.S. Marshal Daniel Wright. We're tracking a fugitive." The man lowered his rifle slightly. "Thought you might be rustlers. Had trouble lately." "We're after the man causing that trouble," Wright replied. "Victor Raven. Seen anyone pass this way? Wounded man riding hard." The rancher squinted against the sun. "Yeah, about 2 hours ago. Heading for the ridge trail." He hesitated, then added, "Wasn't alone, though." Ellie exchanged a sharp glance with Wright. "What do you mean, not alone?" "Met up with somebody," the rancher explained. "Another rider waiting at the fork yonder." He gestured toward a split in the trail ahead. "Had words, then rode on together. Southeast." Wright cursed softly. "He had help waiting." Sarah leaned forward in her saddle. "Could you describe the second rider?" The rancher scratched his graying beard. "Didn't get a good look. Average height, wearing a duster. Had a lawman's bearing, though." "Sirway, lawman," Wright echoed, his brow furrowing. A cold weight settled in Ellie's stomach. "Did this second rider wear a badge?" "Can't say for certain," the rancher replied. "Too far to see details, but they seem familiar with each other, if you take my meaning." "No guns drawn." Ellie turned to Wright, her expression grim. "Raven has a man inside law enforcement. Always has. It's how he's stayed ahead of pursuit all these years." Wright's face darkened. "One of my deputies." "Or local law," Ellie suggested. "Either way, it means Raven's not as isolated as we thought." They thanked the rancher and continued toward the fork he'd indicated, tension thrumming through the group. The revelation of Raven's connection to someone in law enforcement cast a shadow over their pursuit. "If Raven has help," Sarah said quietly as they rode, "someone who can cover his tracks or misdirect other lawmen, then he's always been one step ahead." Ellie finished the thought. "Even at Ridgeline Pass, it wasn't just bad luck that led us into that ambush. Someone knew we were coming." Wright pulled his horse alongside theirs. "You're suggesting a traitor in the Marshal Service." "That's a serious accusation, Blackwood." "It makes sense," Ellie insisted. "How else has Raven operated so successfully for so long? How did he always know exactly when and where to move his stolen goods?" They reached the fork in the trail where Black Hawk confirmed 2 horses had indeed met and continued together. The blood trail remained visible. Raven was still bleeding, still vulnerable despite his newfound company. "We should split up," Wright decided after studying the sign. "Black Hawk and I will follow their trail directly. Blackwood, you and your daughter circle wide approach from the south. If Raven's heading for a particular crossing point on the border, you might be able to cut him off." Ellie nodded, mentally mapping the terrain ahead. "There's an old smuggler's trail through Rattlesnake Ridge. Comes out near Adobe Wells. If he's heading for Mexico, that's his likeliest route." "We'll meet you there," Wright agreed. "And Blackwood," he fixed her with a serious look. "If this lawman with Raven is one of mine, I want him alive to face justice." "Understood." "Understood." Ellie confirmed, though the hard set of her jaw suggested personal justice might look different from the legal variety. As the marshals rode southeast following the direct trail, Ellie led Sarah on a wide arc that would bring them to the southern approach of Rattlesnake Ridge. They pushed their horses as hard as the rough terrain allowed, stopping only once to rest the animals and check Sarah's wound. "How's it feeling?" Ellie asked as Sarah replaced the bandage. "Stiff, but not too painful," Sarah replied. Her face was pale but determined. "Stop looking at me like I might break. I've had worse." Ellie's mouth tightened at those words, evidence of the hard life her daughter had lived in her absence. "We pushed for another hour, then approached the smuggler's trail from below," she said, changing the subject. "If Raven's as wounded as the blood trail suggests, he'll need to rest before attempting the mountain crossing." They remounted and continued their wide circle, the afternoon sun beating down with merciless intensity. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills of Rattlesnake Ridge, a jagged spine of rock that formed a natural barrier between U.S. and Mexican territories. Near dusk, they reached the southern approach to the smuggler's trail. Ellie signaled a halt, surveying the narrow canyon that led up into the mountains. Long shadows filled the passage, offering perfect cover for an ambush. "We go on foot from here," she decided. "Less noise, better chances of surprising them." They secured their horses in a sheltered draw, then armed themselves, Ellie with her recovered Colt, Sarah with a rifle borrowed from Wright's supplies. Moving with practiced stealth, they began their ascent into the canyon. The smuggler's trail wound upward through increasingly narrow passages. In some places, the path was barely wide enough for a horse to pass. Rock walls rose on either side, casting the trail into deep shadow as the sun sank lower. Ellie took the lead, every sense alert for signs of their quarry. Sarah followed close behind, matching her mother's careful footsteps. Despite years of separation, they moved together with natural coordination, two hunters on the same prey. After nearly an hour of cautious climbing, Ellie raised her hand, freezing in place. Sarah halted instantly, eyes questioning. Ellie pointed silently to a small pool of fresh water seeping from the canyon wall. Beside it, clear impressions in the damp soil. Two horses had stopped here recently. A dark stain on a nearby rock confirmed that Raven's wound was still bleeding. They were close. Ellie gestured for Sarah to follow as she continued up the trail, moving even more cautiously now. The canyon began to widen, slightly opening into a natural amphitheater surrounded by steep rock walls. At the far end, the trail continued upward, disappearing into a narrow cleft that formed the actual pass through the ridge. And there, in a small clearing at the base of the cleft, two horses stood hobbled near a meager fire. Ellie pulled back, pressing herself and Sarah into the shadow of a large boulder. From their position, they could observe the camp without being seen. Two figures sat near the fire, one slumped against a saddle, the other standing guard. The seated man was clearly Raven, his arm bound in a crude bandage that showed dark with blood even at this distance. The standing figure was harder to identify in the failing light, but the shape was familiar, average height, wearing a duster. The lawman the rancher had mentioned. "Wright should be approaching from the north by now," Sarah whispered. "If we coordinate." A metallic click behind them cut her words short. "Don't move," a voice ordered quietly. "Hands where I can see them." Ellie's blood froze. She knew that voice, had known it for years, had trusted it. Slowly, she and Sarah raised their hands, turning to face the man behind them. Sheriff James Harmon stood 10 feet away, his revolver trained steadily on them. His weathered face, once familiar and trusted, now seemed like a stranger's. "Sheriff!" Sarah's voice betrayed her confusion. "Sorry it came to this, Ellie," Harmon said, ignoring Sarah. "You should have stayed on your ranch with your horses, should have let the past stay buried." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "It was you," Ellie said quietly. "All these years, you've been Raven's man inside the law." Harmon's mouth tightened. "Let's go. Victor's waiting, and we're running out of daylight." He gestured with his gun toward the camp. Ellie and Sarah had no choice but to comply, moving slowly into the open where Raven could see them. "Well, well," Raven called, his voice strained with pain, but still carrying that mocking edge. "The desert ghost returns with her cub in tow. Harmon, you continue to impress." "Found them watching the camp," Harmon reported, keeping his gun on the women as they approached. "The federal marshal and his tracker can't be far behind." "Then we need to move," Raven said, struggling to his feet. The bandage on his arm was soaked through his face, pale with blood loss. "Are these two all you found?" "For now," Harmon replied. "But we should assume the others are close." Raven limped toward Ellie, studying her with a mixture of hatred and reluctant admiration. 8 years I managed to stay ahead of the law. Built something real. Then you resurface and it all comes crashing down in a single night. "Stealing horses in my territory was your mistake," Ellie replied evenly. "Silver Spirit was never just another horse." "So I gathered." Raven's eyes shifted to Sarah. "And you brought your daughter back into my sights. History repeating itself, wouldn't you say, Marshal? Only this time, there's no husband to die in your place." Sarah tensed beside Ellie but remained silent, her eyes calculating distances and possibilities. "Why James?" Ellie asked, turning to Harmon. "All these years as sheriff, people trusted you. I trusted you." Harmon's expression hardened. "You think a sheriff's salary pays for anything? 25 years upholding the law, and what did I have to show for it? Nothing. Victor offered a way out, a percentage of his operations in exchange for information, for looking the other way when necessary. You betrayed your badge." Ellie said, disgust evident in her voice. I survived, Harmon countered. Something you should understand given your own choices. We all make compromises, Ellie. Not like this, she shot back. Never like this. Raven interrupted their exchange with an impatient gesture. Touching as this reunion is, we need to move. Those federal marshals will reach the canyon entrance soon. What about them? Harmon nodded toward Ellie and Sarah. Raven's scarred mouth twisted in a cold smile. Bring them. Insurance for the border crossing. After that, he left the implication hanging. You won't make it across the border. Sarah spoke up, her voice steady despite the gun pointed at her. Not with that wound. You're leaving too much blood behind. Concern for my health? How touching, Raven mocked. But I've survived worse. Haven't I, Marshal? He directed this last question at Ellie. Before she could answer, a shot cracked from the canyon entrance. The bullet kicked up dirt near Raven's feet, sending him diving for cover. Marshal Wright, Harmon shouted, dragging Ellie in front of him as a shield. Hold your fire, I've got hostages. In the chaos, Sarah dropped to the ground, rolling toward the nearest cover, a fallen log near the fire. Raven scrambled toward the horses, fumbling with his good arm to release their hobbles. Another shot echoed through the canyon, this one striking the rock wall near Harmon's head. He cursed, pulling Ellie tighter against him, his gun pressed to her temple. I will kill her, Wright, he shouted. Back off now. You're surrounded, Harmon, Wright's voice called from somewhere in the gathering darkness. There's no way out. Sarah used the distraction to reach the fallen log, peering over it to locate Wright and Blackhawk. She couldn't see them, but the shots had come from the canyon entrance. They must be using the boulders there for cover. Raven managed to free one horse and was struggling to mount his wounded arm, hampering his efforts. Harmon, he called. Get over here. Bring the woman. Harmon began moving backward toward Raven, keeping Ellie as a shield. Stay where you are, Wright, he warned. Or I put a bullet in her head. Sarah caught Ellie's eye from behind the log. A silent communication passed between them, the instinctive understanding of two hunters working in tandem. Ellie gave the slightest nod. As Harmon continued his retreat, Ellie suddenly went limp, dropping her full weight against him. The unexpected move threw him off balance. In the split second his gun wavered, Sarah rose from behind the log, rifle raised. Drop it, Sheriff, she commanded. Harmon recovered quickly, swinging his gun toward Sarah. You don't have the nerve, girl, he sneered. Ellie drove her elbow into his stomach with all her strength. As he doubled over, she twisted, free spinning to face him. It happened in heartbeats. Harmon, straightening gun, rising toward Ellie. Sarah's rifle cracking in the confined space. The impact of the bullet spinning Harmon around his shot, going wild as he collapsed. Raven finally mounted, wheeled his horse toward the mountain pass, spurring hard despite his wound. Harmon, he shouted, looking back. He's done, Ellie called. And so are you, Raven. It's over. Raven's face contorted with fury. He drew his revolver, aiming not at Ellie but at Sarah, who stood exposed beside the fallen log. Ellie lunged without thinking, throwing herself into the line of fire as Raven's gun roared. Pain exploded in her shoulder, white-hot and familiar. She staggered, falling to one knee as warm blood soaked her shirt. Mom! Sarah screamed, running to her side. From the canyon entrance, multiple shots rang out as Wright and Blackhawk opened fire on Raven. His horse reared, nearly throwing its wounded rider, then bolted toward the mountain pass with Raven clinging desperately to the saddle. Sarah knelt beside Ellie, pressing her hand against the wound to stem the bleeding. How bad is it? Through and through, Ellie gasped, the pain bringing unwelcome memories of Ridgeline Pass. Same damn shoulder. Wright and Blackhawk emerged from their cover, running toward them. Blackwood, Wright called, his face tight with concern. How bad? I'll live, Ellie managed. Raven, Blackhawk, stay with them. Wright ordered, already turning toward the second horse. I'm going after Raven. You'll never catch him alone, Blackhawk protested. We can't let him reach Mexico, Wright replied grimly. Not after all this. He mounted quickly, checking his revolver before spurring the horse toward the mountain pass. Blackhawk knelt beside Ellie, examining her wound with practiced hands. Clean exit wound, he confirmed. We need to stop the bleeding. While he worked, Sarah moved to check on Harmon. The former sheriff lay motionless, his unseeing eyes staring up at the darkening sky. He's dead, she reported, her voice hollow. She set aside the rifle, looking at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. Ellie watched her daughter's face, recognizing the shock that comes with taking a human life, even one that deserved it. "You did what had to be done," she said softly. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained troubled. All those years he was working with Raven, was he already corrupt when Ridgeline happened? When your father died? Ellie winced as Blackhawk applied pressure to her wound. It's possible, maybe even likely, which means he could have been the one who told Raven you were coming, Sarah finished. The reason Dad died. The realization hung heavy between them. If Harmon had been Raven's informant even then, he bore responsibility for Robert's death for the ambush that had shattered their family. Blackhawk finished bandaging Ellie's shoulder, helping her to a sitting position against a boulder. "That should hold until we can get you proper medical attention," he said. "But we need to get you down from this mountain before full dark." "Not without Wright," Ellie insisted. "He can't face Raven alone." As if summoned by her words, gunshots echoed from higher up the pass. 2-3 shots in quick succession, then silence. "Stay here," Blackhawk ordered, drawing his revolver and moving toward the sound. Sarah helped Ellie to her feet, supporting her against the wave of dizziness that followed. "You've lost too much blood," she said, concern evident in her voice. "We need to get you to a doctor." "Not yet," Ellie replied, her focus on the pass where Wright had disappeared. "Not until we know." Minutes stretched into an eternity of waiting. Finally, hoofbeats sounded from the pass. A single rider emerged from the gathering darkness. Marshal Wright slumped forward in the saddle, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. Blackhawk rushed to help him dismount. Wright's coat was torn and bloody, his face scraped raw on one side where he'd apparently fallen. "Raven?" Ellie asked as they helped Wright to the fire. "Dead." Wright confirmed, his voice rough with pain. "Caught up to him at the summit. Horse threw him when I fired. He went over the edge, 100-foot drop onto rocks." "You're certain?" Sarah pressed. "He survived before." Wright nodded grimly. "I climbed down to check. No one walks away from that fall. It's done." A profound silence fell over the group as the news sank in. Victor Raven, the man who had haunted Ellie's nightmares for 8 years, who had orphaned Sarah and driven them apart, was finally truly gone. "It doesn't feel how I expected," Sarah said quietly after a long moment. "It never does," Ellie replied, understanding exactly what her daughter meant. Vengeance once achieved brought neither peace nor satisfaction, only a hollow emptiness where purpose had been. Dawn painted the eastern sky with pale gold as they made their slow descent from Rattlesnake Ridge. Ellie rode double with Sarah, her wounded shoulder throbbing with each movement of the horse. Blackhawk led Wright's mount, the marshal, himself barely conscious after his own injuries had been hastily treated. They had left Harmon's body wrapped in blankets to be recovered later. Raven remained where he had fallen, food for desert scavengers. Neither deserved more. By mid-morning, they reached the spot where their horses waited. The descent to flat ground was easier from there, though still painfully slow for the wounded members of the party. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they rode across the desert flatlands, adobe wells visible as a distant smudge on the horizon. Ellie considered the question, looking out at the familiar landscape she had called home for 8 years. So much had changed in just 2 days. Her anonymity shattered, her past dragged into the harsh light of day. Her carefully constructed barriers broken down by necessity and circumstance. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to being just the widow Blackwood, not after this." "You could return to the marshals," Sarah suggested. "Wright would vouch for you. Your reputation—" "No," Ellie said firmly. "That life is still behind me. But perhaps there's a middle ground, something between hiding on my ranch and wearing a badge again." Sarah rode in silence for a moment. "And what about us?" She finally asked the question, heavy with 8 years of absence and pain. Ellie reached back briefly, covering her daughter's hand with her own. "That's up to you. I won't disappear again, Sarah. But I understand if you need time or space, or—" "I don't need space," Sarah interrupted. "I've had 8 years of space. What I need is—" She paused, searching for words. "Truth, understanding, maybe even forgiveness eventually." "All of which take time," Ellie acknowledged. "Time we now have," Sarah said, a tentative hope in her voice. They rode on toward Adobe Wells, where a doctor would tend their wounds, and telegraphs would be sent reporting Raven's death and Harmon's betrayal. The journey ahead would be neither simple nor easy. Healing rarely was. But for the first time since Ridgeline Pass, Ellie felt the crushing weight of guilt begin to lift. Her daughter rode beside her, wounded but alive. The man who had destroyed their family was dead, and the future once so carefully circumscribed by fear and regret now stretched before them with unexpected possibility. 3 months later, Eleanor Blackwood stood on the porch of Shadow Creek Ranch, watching as Sarah expertly guided Silver Spirit through a series of complex maneuvers in the corral. Horse and rider moved as one, communicating through subtle shifts of weight and pressure that were nearly invisible to the untrained eye. Ellie's shoulder still ached in the mornings, a reminder of the bullet that had found the same mark twice in her lifetime. But the pain was manageable and lessening with time. The same could be said for the deeper wounds between mother and daughter. Sarah had stayed after their return from Rattlesnake Ridge, moving into the small second bedroom of the cabin. Their first weeks together had been awkward, tense, with unspoken recriminations and carefully maintained distances. But gradually, hesitantly, they had begun to rebuild. Stories shared over coffee in the mornings, silent companionship during long rides across the desert, practical lessons in tracking as Ellie passed on the skills that had defined her life. Sarah finished her exercise with Silver Spirit guiding him to the corral gate where Ellie waited. The magnificent dun Mustang nuzzled Ellie's hand in greeting before accepting the apple she offered. "He's responding well to the new training approach," Sarah observed, dismounting with the fluid grace that reminded Ellie so much of Robert. "You have a gift with horses," Ellie replied. "Your father would be proud." Sarah smiled, no longer flinching at the mention of her father. "I've been thinking about what you said last week about finding middle ground between hiding and returning to the badge." Ellie raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "What if we combined our skills?" Sarah suggested. "Your tracking expertise, my bounty hunting experience. Not as federal marshals, but as independent operators. There's always demand for people who can find things or people that don't want to be found." Ellie considered the idea. In the months since Raven's death, word had spread about the return of the Desert Ghost. She'd already received several requests for help locating missing persons or stolen property. She'd declined them all, uncertain if she was ready to step back into that world. But with Sarah beside her, perhaps there was a way forward that honored both her past and her present. It would mean leaving the ranch sometimes, Ellie pointed out, traveling, being visible again. "We'd take only the cases we chose," Sarah countered, "set our own terms, and we'd always have this place to return to." "We," Ellie repeated softly, hearing the permanence in that simple word. Sarah met her gaze steadily. "I'm not saying everything between us is fixed. There are still days when I'm angry about the years we lost, but I'm tired of letting the past determine my future." She hesitated, then added, "Our future." The sound of an approaching rider interrupted their conversation. Both women turned toward the road, instantly alert, a habit that neither would likely ever lose. Marshal Daniel Wright appeared around the bend, riding alone. His arm, broken during the confrontation with Raven, had healed well enough for him to return to duty. "Ladies," he greeted them, touching the brim of his hat as he dismounted. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Not at all, Marshal," Ellie replied. "Coffee's fresh if you're interested." They settled on the porch where the autumn sun provided warmth against the morning chill. Wright accepted the offered coffee, taking a long, appreciative sip before getting to business. "I've been authorized by the Justice Department to make you an offer, Blackwood," he began. "Not a return to the badge, I know where you stand on that, but a consulting position. Your expertise called upon when needed on your terms." Ellie glanced at Sarah, who raised an eyebrow in silent communication. "What kind of consulting?" Ellie asked. "Training, mostly," Wright explained. "Teaching younger marshals tracking skills that are becoming rare. Occasional field work for special cases." He paused, then added, "The position could be extended to your daughter as well, given her own proven abilities." "Interesting timing, Marshal," Sarah remarked. "We were just discussing something similar ourselves." Wright smiled. "Great minds, as they say." He placed his coffee cup on the porch railing. "Think about it. The service needs people like you, both of you, and it might be a more secure arrangement than independent operation." "We'll consider it," Ellie promised. After Wright departed, Sarah leaned against the porch post, studying her mother's face. "So what do you think?" Ellie looked out across the land she'd called home for 8 years. the place where she'd hidden from her past and from herself. It was still home, still a sanctuary, but perhaps it could be something more now, a base from which to venture out into the world again with purpose and without fear. I think, she said slowly, that it's time to stop running from who I am. Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face and erasing the last shadows of their painful past. Then let's ride Desert Ghost. The trail's waiting. Together they stood on the porch of Shadow Creek Ranch, watching as the sun climbed higher over the Dragoon Mountains. Beyond those peaks lay Mexico, where Victor Raven had met his end. Behind them lay 8 years of separation and pain. And before them stretched a future neither had dared imagine just 3 months ago, a future they would navigate together as mother and daughter, as trackers, as survivors. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, as Eleanor and Sarah Blackwood, once lost to each other, turned toward the horizon and whatever it might bring. The desert holds no forgiveness, only truth, harsh and uncompromising as the land itself. 8 years ago, a woman buried her badge in the sand, convinced that running would protect what she loved most. Today, she stands beneath an endless sky shoulder, scarred twice by the same enemy, but no longer broken by guilt. Some say vengeance brings no peace, but peace was never what she sought. Only justice for a husband murdered for a daughter, abandoned for a life torn apart by a single moment of fatal pride. They found that justice, mother and daughter, in the shadow of Rattlesnake Ridge. Not in the body of a man who fell to his death, or in the betrayal of a sheriff who chose greed over honor, but in the silence that finally settled between them. In words long unspoken, in forgiveness neither thought possible. The silver spirit runs free across Shadow Creek Ranch, now his hooves drumming a rhythm that sounds like coming home. 2 women watch from the porch, their copper eyes reflecting the setting sun. Tomorrow they ride again, not in pursuit of ghosts, but towards something new. Perhaps there is no perfect ending to a story built on loss, but there are new beginnings forged in blood, and tears stronger for having been tested by fire. Some trails once found lead exactly where they should.